Welcome back to the CNN Healthcare Debate with Senators Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders. Senators, thanks so much for participating here. I want to ask you, since Obamacare was enacted, governors of 31 states plus the District of Columbia have opted to expand Medicaid through federal funding, providing insurance to 11 million low-income people. One of the Americans who benefited from the Obamacare Medicaid expansion is Carol Hardaway of Salisbury, Maryland. Carol?
Thank you. I have multiple sclerosis, but could not afford insurance. Without the treatment or medications I need, I had problems with walking, with my speech, and my vision. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, I moved from our home state of Texas, because they refused to expand Medicaid, to Maryland. And within 2 weeks, I started receiving treatments through Medicaid and am now well enough to work as a substitute teacher. Senator Cruz, can you promise me that you and the Republican leaders in Congress will actually have a replacement plan in place for people like me who depend on their Medicaid? In other words, I like my coverage. Can I keep it?
Well, Carol, thank you for sharing your story, and congratulations on dealing with MS. It's a terrible disease, and congratulations on your struggles dealing with it. You know, if you look at Medicaid, more than half of the people who've been covered under Obamacare have been under Medicaid. And the problem is Medicaid is a profoundly troubled program. And so it may be working well with you. But I'll tell you, nationally, the health outcomes under Medicaid are really poor. Nationally, 54% of doctors won't take new Medicaid patients. Nationally, dental care appointments for moms are denied at a 63% rate on Medicaid. The denial rate for private insurance is 4%. And Medicaid patients are almost twice as likely to die from medical treatment as those with private health insurance. The solution for people who are hurting, I believe, we should have a system that allows as many people as possible to be on the private health insurance of your choice rather than Medicaid, because the Medicaid outcomes are not working and people are suffering. And what's happened also, it's really quite striking. Because Obamacare dramatically expanded Medicaid, many of the people who had been on Medicaid, many of the people who are really suffering and needy, have found their wait times increasing. In fact, in Illinois, on Medicaid, over 700 people have died on the waiting list for care for Medicaid. So I'm glad that you're receiving health care. I can tell you a great many of the people on Medicaid aren't, and I'd much rather see a system where we can have millions of those on Medicaid getting health insurance. And the only way they can is if we have competition so that rates are lower so that you can afford to have health insurance.
Senator Sanders.
We heard from a woman who runs a hair salon in Fort Worth who can't afford to provide health insurance to her workers and for herself. We hear a story now about a woman who has to leave her own state, go to another state, because that state is providing Medicaid. My friends, you are living, I know you don't know this, by these stories. You're living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, where the rich are becoming phenomenally richer, while we have 43 million people living in poverty and the middle class is in decline. These stories are obscene. They should not be taking place in the United States. Now, are there problems with Medicaid? Of course there are. But I will tell you something. To those Republican governors around the country who told poor people that they would not be able to, for the first time in their lives, in many instances, get access to health care, to be able to go to a doctor when the federal government paid for the first 3 years at 100%. I hope that those governors sleep well at night, because I don't know how many people lost their lives as a result of their decision. So once again, what we are looking at is a dysfunctional system. We spend more, we get less. People who work hard have no health insurance. People have to move from one state or the other. This country finally is going to have to do, in my view, what every other major country does. And yes, I believe, Ted, health care is a human right. And I believe that this country has got to join every other major country and say, you can stay home and get quality care because you're an American. You can run your small business well and get care because you are an American. That is where we have got to go.
Well, you know, when Bernie says, well, Medicaid has problems, you want to talk about people who lost their rights. 742 people in Illinois were put on a waiting list for Medicaid after Illinois expanded its Medicaid, Barack Obama's home state, and they died awaiting care under Medicaid. Why? Because Medicaid is ration care, those wait lists. You know, Bernie likes to talk about Medicare for all, but let me be clear what his program is. It's Medicaid for all. It is rationed care nationally, and you want to know what that looks like. He keeps pointing to other countries. Let's look at, for example, the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, a 2001 report, noted that 39% of women over 80 in the United Kingdom receive surgery for breast cancer, compared to 90% of the women under 50. And that women under, or men and women under the age of 55 were 2.5 times more likely than those over 75 to receive cancer treatments. More than 80% of older patients in the United Kingdom believe they're discriminated against by their government-run health care. You want to know what rationing looks like? It looks like Medicaid. It looks like the people who are suffering. And if you look at this country, across this country, we have 291 million people, roughly, that are covered by insurance. I don't think we should be screwing up the insurance of millions of Americans and putting them under rationing. And that's what Obamacare has moved us down the road to doing, and it's not working.
Okay. Ted correctly indicates Medicaid has problems. And Vermont has problems. All over the country, it has problems. You know what Ted's solution is? Massive cuts in federal funding for Medicaid. So you got a problem, and what Ted wants to do is make it worse. You mentioned dental care. And maybe you want to go on my bill, which will provide dental care to tens of millions of Americans who can't afford it right now. What we need to do, by the way, is to tell dentists out there that they may have to do more than just make you have a nice smile, but they may have to provide real dental care to the children and others who absolutely need it. Furthermore, what we have to do is we need tens of thousands more doctors in this country. We have a major crisis in primary care. There are areas in urban America and in rural America where people literally can't find a doctor to serve their needs. And one of the reasons, a number of reasons for that, one of them is you go to medical school, you can come out hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And then you're going to become a plastic surgeon, not doing primary care in an urban area or rural America, which tells me that we got to expand the program called the National Health Service Corps so that our young people can get their debts repaid if they commit to serving in underserved areas. Let's get doctors out into the areas where we need them.
Let me just jump in if I can. Carol, just shake your head. Did Senator Cruz, your former senator, did he answer your question? No, he did not. The question was, Senator Cruz, can you promise me that you and the Republican leaders in Congress will actually have a replacement plan in place for people like me who depend on their Medicaid? She got Medicaid through the Obamacare expansion of Medicaid. We've all heard you criticize Medicaid. What happens to Carol?
Well, what I said, Jake, is that Medicaid isn't working for millions of people, and Obamacare made Medicaid worse by expanding the wait list, by jamming more people on it. You want to talk about replacement? There's widespread agreement on replacement plans. Number one, allowing people to purchase across state lines, giving you more choice. Now, Bernie said he opposes that. He doesn't want to let you buy insurance in other states. Number two, expanding health savings accounts so you can save in a tax-advantaged way to meet your own health care needs. Number three, making health insurance portable so that it goes with you from job to job. I imagine, ma'am, at some point you had insurance with a job. If insurance was portable right now, federal tax law incentivizes most of us get our insurance from the government. And if you lose your, or not from the government, from our employer rather, and if you lose your job, you lose that insurance. One of the best solutions to the problem of pre-existing conditions is making health insurance portable so it goes with you. You know, when you lose your job, you don't lose your car insurance, your life insurance, your house insurance. There's no reason to lose your health insurance. And if your insurance is portable, it goes with you, it's affordable, you have choices. Now, notice Bernie's solution. We want more doctors. We all agree on more doctors. He says, well, the government needs to hire more. You know, I can point to something that works on that. In Texas, we passed tort reform. We fundamentally limited lawsuits and lawsuit abuse. And you know what we've seen? We've seen the number of doctors increasing dramatically. We've seen medical malpractice premiums dropping. Those are the kind of solutions supported at the state level that will result in more doctors. But Obamacare is discouraging people from going to medical school and training to be doctors.
Well, Ted, I didn't want to raise it, but you brought it forth. Do you know what state in the country, and I don't blame you for this, but what state in the country has the highest rate of uninsured in America? By far, it is the state of Texas. And by the way, may I say proudly that Vermont is number 2 in terms of the percentage of people who are insured. We have relatively few who are uninsured. And by the way, amazingly enough, do you know what state in the country has the highest rate of people who are insured? It is Massachusetts with Obamacare, which was the prototype for the Affordable Care Act.
Well, you know, the nice thing, Bernie, again, people vote with their feet. And for north of a decade now, roughly 1,000 people a day have been moving to Texas because we have an environment that allows people to get jobs. And so people vote with their feet. And you're right, there are states. Vermont is a lovely state. Doesn't have a ton of diversity. Doesn't have nearly the populations Texas has, that are populations that are just starting. When my dad went to Texas in 1957, when he was 18, he couldn't speak English. He was from Cuba. He had $100 in his underwear. He washed dishes making 50 cents an hour. You know what? He didn't have health care. But he came to go to the University of Texas. He came to get opportunity. That job enabled him to get another job where he could get health care. That's a much better solution. Create an environment where you don't tax the living daylights out of people. It's why people choose to be where they get jobs.
Aren't we all happy that under Obama we created 15 million new jobs in the private sector?
Senators, I want to get to more audience questions, and this one is about the fact that the Affordable Care Act requires that all insurance plans cover what the law calls essential health benefits. This includes maternity and delivery costs. We have a question on what will happen to that coverage from Maria Shahid Rowe, who was pregnant with her second child. Maria?
Thank you. I'm a nursing student at the Medical University of South Carolina, and I'm concerned about the implications that repealing the Affordable Care Act will have on women's health, and specifically for pregnant women. So I'm 5 months pregnant, and I actually qualified for Medicaid due to being a full-time student. My husband works for a church. We live on a very modest income at the moment. Senator Cruz, what policies do you have in place to protect pregnant women from losing their health coverage, either due to being considered having a pre-existing condition or from being charged higher insurance premiums than men?
Well, congratulations on your new baby. Is it a boy or girl?
It's a surprise.
Oh, well, wonderful. and you said you have an older child. What's your older child?
We have a 2-year-old son.
What's his name?
Samson.
Oh, well, maybe you'll have Delilah, and that'll be, how wonderful, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Heidi and I have two little girls at home, and it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Listen, maternity coverage is incredibly important. But here's how Obamacare worked. You had a lot of politicians in Washington who said, we're going to mandate every coverage on earth. And it sounds really good. I had a conversation a couple of years ago with a gentleman in Amarillo, Texas, who told me the story about his 101-year-old aunt who had just had her insurance canceled.
What's her name?
And she said the reason it was canceled was that it didn't cover maternity care.
Maria.
Now, this fellow laughed and said, you know what? My aunt is 101 years old. She doesn't really need maternity coverage right now. We should have a system, I believe, where you can choose to get the policies that meet your needs. And the impact, especially for young people, of all the mandated coverage. You know, it's interesting. The Democrats' view, they're big on talking about insurance coverage. But it's a little bit like giving everyone a bus ticket when there are no buses. What we should care about is access to health care, not just insurance per se. And what's happened under Obamacare is that millions of people can't afford it. We should be concerned about people being able to afford health insurance, and that means giving them the choice in 50 states to choose a policy. In your instance, you would choose a policy that had maternity coverage, but someone else who right now kind of can't afford it might choose a different policy. And when government mandates it, those choices go away.
Senator Sanders, your response?
What Ted is really telling you is they will not guarantee coverage for you. And not every pregnancy is planned. And if a pregnant woman before Obamacare, you know what you would consider to be? A pre-existing condition. And now, why would an insurance company want to provide care to you when having a baby is a fairly expensive proposition? You don't make money doing that. And Ted keeps talking about these mandates. So let's be clear again what Senator Cruz and his Republican friends want to do. They do not want to guarantee that women who become pregnant will be able to get the health care and the prenatal care that they need, which is a terrible thing, by the way, because we have one of the highest infant mortality rates in the industrialized world. He says to young people who today are on their parents' program, you're out, you're on your own after you leave college. He says that if you come down with a terrible illness and you're ending up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, your insurance company can now tell you that there is a limit to what they will pay. And he is telling 20 million people who gained health insurance under Obamacare, sorry, you're out on the streets. Bottom line is, once again, the discussion, if you really think about the kinds of discussion that we're having, it is an absurd discussion for the wealthiest nation in the history of the world.
Senator Sanders, let me follow up on that.
If I may. I want to respond to that real briefly.
Please, go ahead.
It's interesting sometimes the rhetoric that our friends on the left like to say that anyone who doesn't support government control of our health care somehow doesn't like and fit in whatever population you're talking about. But let's again go back to facts, and let's talk about young people. There's no group in America, I think, that's been hurt more by Obamacare than young people. Young people were left on the chopping block. Let's talk about some basic stats. A recent study found that the Obamacare mandates, what Bernie just sang an ode to, have increased, the three costliest mandates have increased premiums for younger people by 44%. Without those mandates, the typical 21-year-old would pay $1,100 a year less. If you're 21, think about whether it would be easier to afford health care if it cost $1,100 a year less. And let's talk about some specifics. Before Obamacare, the most affordable plan that was available for a 30-year-old Texan, for a 30-year-old Texan woman was $470 a year. Today, under Obamacare, the cheapest plan that's available for a healthy 30-year-old woman in Fort Worth is $3,236. It's gone from $470 to $3,000, over $3,200. That's why young people are hurting. And what Obamacare did is it jacked up the rates on all the young people. Why do you think there's an individual mandate? It's to force young people to pay really high rates to subsidize the rest of the system. And if you don't pay it, the IRS fines you. And over 6 million people are fined each year by the IRS under Obamacare.
Senator, we're going to get to the question of fines and so forth in a minute, but I want to circle back to women's health and ask you, Senator Sanders, why should a 60-year-old male or women who are beyond childbearing years be required to have health insurance plans that have maternity care?
I don't think they should. But I do think that's one of the changes we might want to look at.
Okay.
But I do believe that in the United States of America, where we talk a lot about our love for children, that pregnancy is not and should not be considered a pre-existing condition. That every woman in this country who gets pregnant should be 100% assured that she is going to get the highest quality care she needs to deliver a healthy baby.
Senator Cruz, I want to stay on the issue of women's health. Under Obamacare, women pay nothing out of pocket for birth control. So will that continue under any Republican replacement?
It's going to be a choice for each patient to make. Listen, Obamacare is all about these mandates. And, Margaret Thatcher famously said, the problem with socialism, eventually you run out of other people's money. The same is true with the mandates. Every mandate, people will say, gosh, I'd like that. Imagine if the federal government mandated that everyone in America must drive a Lamborghini. Now, I've never driven a Lamborghini. I mean, they look kind of fun. But you know what? I'm willing to bet most of us, if that was the mandate, and it'd be cool, you say leather seats, you could go, I don't know, 200 miles an hour. What it would mean for most people is you couldn't afford a car. If they said, but you know, gosh, the VW Bug is not fancy enough. You need everything. For most people who can't afford it, it doesn't work. That's what Obamacare is doing. I would love for everyone to have maximum coverage on everything, but there's no magic fairy with pixie dust that gives it away for free. And these mandates are hurting people because it's putting people in a situation like LaRhonda where they get nothing. They don't get health care of any kind. Her employees don't get health care because Obamacare has driven the cost up, and that's why people are hurting so much under it.
2 points. Our employees are not getting health care because in Texas, you did not expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act.
No, she has 49 employees. She's not covered under it, and she's not hiring more because of
But
Obama.
lower income people would be eligible for Medicaid. Second of all, I think that it is very clear that the discussion that we're having when Ted talks about mandates, I look at it differently. And also what we should be clear about is Ted says, well, it's just not enough money. We all can't drive fancy cars. I think it's a bit disingenuous to talk about driving a fancy car with getting access to health care when you're sick. Last point on this issue. If we repeal the Affordable Care Act, we are going to provide $346 billion in tax breaks to the top 2%. Ted, in other ways, goes even further. He wants to repeal the estate tax, which applies to the top 0.2%, the very wealthiest people in this country, and give them collectively hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks. Ted, we are the wealthiest country in the world. And it's not a question of everybody driving a fancy car, but it is a question to making sure that every man, woman, and child in this country has health care as a right.
I want to bring it back to a subject.
Jake, let me respond to that real quickly. I know this gentleman has a question,
As
but
long
I
as
want
you're
to
not going
respond
to talk
to what
about the
Bernie
estate
said.
tax.
What Bernie said real quickly, I want to respond to just briefly. Which, you know, it was interesting in the course of the campaign last year. I would encounter young people all over the country. There were a lot of young people who supported our campaign, a lot of young people who supported Bernie's. And I would talk with different people supporting Bernie. And I'd say to them, typically young people, I'd say, you know what, I agree with Bernie. And they'd sort of look at me, they'd be startled. They'd say, what are you talking about? I said, listen, Bernie talks about how Washington is corrupt, how both parties are corrupt, how both parties are in bed with big business and big money, and it is a corrupt system benefiting the special interest. I agree absolutely and entirely. And what I tell folks is where I disagree is in his solution. If the problem is government is corrupt, why on earth would you want more power in Washington? I want to take power out of Washington and empower the people. When it comes to taxes, what I want to see is a simple flat tax of 10% for everyone and abolish the IRS. That ends the power of the lobbyists. It ends the power of Washington. That's a one that empowers the people.
One second, if I could respond. And in the midst of massive, unprecedented income and wealth inequality, Ted's plan, according to the Wall Street Journal, would give incredible tax breaks to the top 1%.
Okay, we'll do another town hall debate on tax reform.
Good.
Okay, we're going to take a very quick break, and when we come back, a subject where there might be some agreement. The debate continues with Senators Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders in a moment. Stay with us.
I realize that $100,000 is not exactly a fortune.
103.
103. Okay. Well, let me ask you guys, how long did it take you two to save that?
Oh, a long time.
Long time.
Then it's a fortune.
Well, I'm sure you talk to people all the time who think $100,000 is just pocket change.
Right now, we're just talking to you.
I told you we had a fortune.
Yes, you did.